event. It's a real pleasure to have you. And quite honestly, I know from having heard you speak before that this is indeed a treat for all of us. We're likely to be enjoying ourselves today while being educated and have our eyes opened to the possibilities out there. So welcome, Bob. And maybe if we can just have you start with telling us a little bit about yourself for our audience here.
So hello, everyone. I'm Bob Murphy. Thank you very much, Bindia, for the opportunity to talk to your good self and everyone who joins today. Welcome. So just a little bit about myself. I am indeed IBM's Chief Procurement Officer. I've held that position since January 2014. And actually, I've been with IBM for 42 years now. So I joined when I was 5, not only joking, I joined when I was 17. So I've been in IBM a long time, been in procurement for about 25 years. I'm married. I live in North Carolina, although the discerning amongst you, I am sure, will have figured out I am not American. I'm actually Scottish, although I do hold a US passport now. I'm a dual national. I have 2 grown-up sons, and I believe that being a CPO and being in procurement is one of the most impactful positions and roles and functions in any company. And I'm absolutely delighted that Bindia gave me the opportunity to talk with her and also with you all on this call. So really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Bob. That's really interesting. And I will say that meeting Bob and talking to Bob is always a really fun and exciting time because of, as you said, you come with a lot of years at IBM, but obviously I am really jealous of your Scottish heritage and quite honestly, your accent. I just love the Scottish accent. So I think it'll be an interesting 1 hour. Now, obviously, Bob, you mentioned that procurement is very transformational, and we all have seen that in the last few months. We all think procurement is this thing that just works until something goes wrong, and then the last few months, everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong for our profession. So it has been a really whirlwind couple of months. And indeed, I will say I have not heard the word supply chain in the mainstream news as frequently ever, in fact, as I have until the last few months. In fact, even my favorite late night comedy shows have been talking about supply chain disruptions. And I will say I had to do a double take when a couple of them were talking about disruptions that hit the supply chain and what we have to do to deal with those as a society. Resolink, over the last few months since January, has been hosting these bi-weekly conference calls in this format in the aftermath of the COVID disruptions, and particularly since mid-January to talk, to educate the industry about the state of the supply chain, what to expect. And you may have seen we have generated some planning scenarios, measuring and helping our customers plan for different outcomes. And then most recently, we've switched to talking about the new normal, how the last few months might change supply chain for the future. And so in that backdrop, it's really exciting to actually have you here to talk about this topic. And in particular, supply chain risk management, because in some respects, IBM's supply chain risk management journey predates my own. And the people who I learned supply chain risk management from were actually ex-IBMers who often talked about learning supply chain risk management in IBM. So this has been a long-standing critical initiative and highest priority for your team and for the company. So let's start with that history. As one of high-tech industry's oldest companies, help us understand the uniqueness and the complexity of our industry as you see it.
Yeah, so, interesting question to start with, Bindia. And, IBM, like many companies globally, we have a global sourcing strategy. We want to be ensuring continuity of supply and to actually work with the best suppliers in the world in terms of pricing, technology, quality, and all aspects of service delivery, wherever they are located in the world. And so sourcing from suppliers who are located globally and in many different countries in a supply chain means the supply chain can be vulnerable to many types of risks. I mean, if you look at what's just happened recently, we had a health crisis, then we got into an economic crisis, which is still going on with us. We've had geopolitical events and regulatory issues that have been, giving us many challenges in lots of different parts of the world. So as a global company, it is really important upon us, all of us, and especially those of us in procurement and supply chain, to actually have a resilient supply chain, a supply chain that can ensure continuity of supply for our clients, despite the many various risks and things that can happen globally. That is the true effectiveness and efficacy of a great procurement and sourcing team, is to predetermine what those risks can possibly be and put in things that are going to eliminate that risk so that we can continue to be great suppliers to our end clients, both us and our suppliers, tier ones, tier two, through all the tiers that we have.
Yeah, these are really good points, Bob. And, obviously, that this is an area where Resilink operates. We monitor, we send out early warning and alerts to our customers for more than 45 different types of events. Anything from, like you said, it could be a regulatory issue today, it could be a government thing, it could be a earthquake, hurricane type of thing, or it could be lawsuits. And for IBM, one of the things that your team monitors very, very often is changes that might happen, such as M&As, CEO, CFO changes, business sales spin-off type of activity, which your team monitors and keeps a close eye on, because sometimes that can trigger some operational type of changes at the supplier. And we do this in more than 100 languages because, as we know, our supply chain is not nicely in the English-speaking countries, and so we have to make sure that we get information from the places in the languages that our suppliers operate in. And so our system not only sends out those alerts, but also provides collaboration tools for enabling your team to collaborate with those suppliers in this area. Obviously, this was something that was very critical in the case of COVID-19, because our social media feeds, which we monitor in China, picked up the chatter on December 28th when the local government alerted hospitals in Wuhan to be on the lookout for unknown pneumonia-like symptoms. And so we notified our customers on January 4th that a pattern of unusual pneumonia was happening in Wuhan. And obviously, since then, as you noted, this has become a global pandemic. So talk about, how does the complexity of the supply chain really pose some unique challenges for companies, particularly this is during the COVID situation, as you referenced, lots going on, lots of types of disruptions from all over the place.
Yeah, great context, and that was a very early pick up of things which were about to get much worse. So congratulations, Bindia, to you and the team for those early warnings. And we did get them through your tool, and so that was awesome. But, historically, we have been driving our supply chains to be more and more efficient and lean. And so, given the global nature of our business and the drive to optimize inventory and costs, and operate in a just-in-time mode, that in itself gives us some constraints in the supply chain in terms of managing disruptions. And therefore, we need to be investing in proactive risk mitigation plays that are going to help us to be able to be resilient enough when we actually get major events, and we talked about some of those before, that can disrupt our supply chains. Now, as you know, the challenges we've seen during COVID-19 have been beyond any typical disruptions. I mean, the industry has been subject to government lockdowns, we've had shelter-in-place requirements, we've restricted the number of hours that factories can operate, even if they open up at all. Some countries have only allowed factories to operate at 20 to 50% capacity, and in some cases, workers have chosen, for safety reasons and for fear of getting infected, not to appear in work. In other cases where factories could operate, they didn't have the parts coming from their upstream suppliers to be able to continue to supply output that was needed by companies like IBM. So due to the spread of the virus, certain ports and shipping lanes were closed, and in other cases, due to reduced business, flights have been cancelled. It's become increasingly difficult to manage the logistical challenges that we have seen through this pandemic. So when you think about all of this disruption in the context of a growing and global scale pandemic, where the supply chain is based in many countries, you can only imagine the challenge for procurement and companies and supply chain professionals who are in charge of keeping our supply lines open and ensuring continuity of supply with zero disruption to our end clients, which in the end is our #1 goal. You know, we as a procurement organization are very focused on bringing value to our companies and to our clients. And oftentimes, you know, cost savings are very important. There's lots of other important metrics we have, payment terms, and all of these things. But if we cannot deliver goods and services and products on time, we have no business. So we have a mandate from our companies to be absolutely focused on risk mitigation, minimization, ensuring continuity of supply. So we need to be ensuring this is given the same. And in fact, I would contend, Bindia, even more focus. So we often talk about first amongst equals. I think with all of the turbulence, change, and all of the risks that we are seeing now, we as prudent companies and the companies who are going to thrive and survive in this new normal, as you call it, are those who are thoughtful around and managing risk.
This is a very key point. I think in role of procurement itself is shifting the new normal. If you think about it, as you pointed out, historically, procurement focuses too much on cost savings and payment terms and supply relationship management. But for shipping a product out, we can't be only managing our highest spend suppliers. You need every part to be present in order to get that product out the door. So if procurement focuses exclusively on cost reductions and spend, then we leave about a huge chunk of our supply chain that is low spend, but may have some single source, semi-custom, custom type of unique and difficult to manufacture parts unmanaged, or those suppliers we may not have direct and close relationships. So IBM is one of those companies that has obviously been an early industry leader in this area, recognizing that all suppliers are important for risk management. While you may manage spend for your top spend suppliers, on the risk side, to service your customers effectively, every supplier is equally important so that your end product can be built and shipped. So to that end, obviously you have been building tools and capabilities in risk management more than a decade, actually, Bob, under your leadership. Redlink is very proud to be part of your program since 2015, but like I said, your efforts began well before that. So can you talk about the journey for IBM since the last decade or longer? And I know that the dual events of Japan earthquake and Thailand floods were, kind of an eye-opener for our industry as a whole. But what in your mind was the history of supply chain risk that really hit home for you, your team, and the high-tech industry in general, the need to have a more proactive risk and all-encompassing risk management program?
Yeah, that's a lot of comments in there, Bindia. But look, a couple of things I'd say. One is, this isn't just a high-tech phenomena risk. This affects every industry, from telecoms to the communication sectors to the FSS to medical to every industry that is out there. Every vertical needs, goods, services, products, supplies to operate. And as you have seen, we have had experiences dating back to 2011. That was a really disruptive year. I think you probably remember what happened in Japan there. We also had, the flooding situations that were going on around Thailand. So we have had numerous major events that have been hugely disruptive. And as you have rightly pointed out, IBM has been focused on how can we ensure that we are, managing our supply chain, not just at the first tier, but in multiple tiers down, so that we can actually understand and predict and then deal with these risks in a proactive manner. And I would contend to all of the listeners here, or anyone who's looking to be a progressive company, that that's what we need to do. Now, we have been using AI, artificial intelligence. I'm sure you all saw IBM's Watson on Jeopardy. But taking data, it really is all about data now, the application of that data, the understanding of that data, and using that data to fortify our, we call it resiliency in the supply chain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. But, in today's world, this is cross-industry. Risks are across all of the industries. Companies are dealing with global supply chain, irrespective of industry, and they really need to be focused on optimizing the resiliency in the supply chain and using the available tools that are around to manage that.
Yeah, spot on with that one, Bob. And, we actually, couple of things there. One is Reslink works with companies across many industries, and we map the supply chain for many of our customers. And so we see this in action firsthand. There are two things that you said. One is the data, right? And as you can imagine, traditionally procurement works with people, right? People, relationships. I think what we are now seeing is that every person is a silo. Our brains cannot be connected. So the data that procurement people need is actually the unstructured data, the semi-structured data that sits in our heads, in our laptops. And this is the wealth, the asset of the enterprise. And when you have a big team that is globally dispersed, that is manually managing these relationships with thousands of suppliers, as a company, you cannot combine this data in a single place. For example, the data Reslink deals with across our customers in many industries, just take the pharma supply chain. One medium-sized company sources medicines from over 1,300 sites worldwide. But the thing is, they buy most of them from a distributor. And so the pharma company that buys from the distributor does not know where the distributor buys from these 1,300 sites worldwide. And this data might sit in people's heads and the knowledge base that the person managing the supplier has, but the enterprise as a whole cannot leverage it. We saw this come to life with PPEs. If you look at PPE by spend, PPE doesn't even hit 3% of the overall spend of a hospital. hospital, but obviously it brought us to our knees, because from the moment a patient walks in, the moment a patient walks out, you need PPE. And PPE comes from a range of sites worldwide that make them. In fact, one of the large drug manufacturers that ResLink works with, they have a supply chain that spans over 50,000 suppliers worldwide and more than 100,000 sites. So if we look at aerospace, automotive, defense, tens of thousands of suppliers. So it's just impossible for people and humans to keep track of this data, in silos. And for someone like Bob, for you, it must be so important to be able to look at the supply chain overall and make some interesting insights about, hey, what are my single points of failure in the supply chain? And in order to do that for the organization end to end, you would have a team of 40, 50 people to go get information from in order to do that. So can you talk about this notion of centralization of the data, the transparency initiative, and how, in your mind as the leader of a supply chain organization that has this complexity, how do you improve supplier management and also build trust and partnerships in your supplier network using transparency and mapping?
Yeah, again, very comprehensive question, Vindy. And I think a very word you use transparency. And I would say transparency is at the forefront of most leaders' minds these days. Not just around data and provenance of parts and the supply chain, but around everything. I mean, people want to know what is happening. So transparency from their leadership team about the policies, practices, behaviors, transparencies around everything that we are doing. And I think it's even more important and impactful when we talk about supply chains, because if you think about it, there are lots of parts that go into a mainframe computer, or a router or a switch, or products or services that are delivered, and any one of those constituent parts can cause a continuity of supply disruption. So it's really, really important to be able to track what's happening, where, first of all, we understand what are the tier 1 parts that are needed, who are the suppliers who are making those, and then what's the tier 2 parts, who's the suppliers who are making those, and understand, and that relates back to your point around mapping. Now, and so at IBM, we believe we need a completely comprehensive mapping done across all of our suppliers to be able to actually authentically be able to state that we can understand our supply chain, and then we can build resiliency, proactiveness in to prevent. Or I would say a lot of these, events, we could not prevent them, but we need to be able to pivot and actually ensure that we can do, through our contingency planning, actions that will prevent us from having disruptions to our clients. So that mapping process is really important. And I think another comment is, we're all under pressure on terms of, optimizing what we do with our intellectual capital, our people. So we really, the supply chain is very complex, and we can't really throw people at it, intellectual capital. And actually, it can be quite a mundane task, mapping out all the components, mapping out all the suppliers. This is a perfect use of augmented intelligence technology, and that's what we've been focusing on, Bindia.
And this is where we really talk about how mapping can be such an important way for not only your team to all rally around a single set of information that everybody in the organization can access and act on, but also have it available and accessible to a broad range of people within IBM, because a company that has this complexity like IBM also has several people that might be touching or needing information about the supplier. At the end of the day, it all comes back to making sure supply continuity means IBM meets your customer goals. And I think that's just one really important thing that you always talk about. Now, mapping, obviously, it's still somewhat new, even though we've been doing it for many, many years with IBM, and I've been doing it when in my time at Cisco way back when. But we sometimes see that this effort to go map the supply chain can create some nervousness on part of the supplier. And, sometimes the suppliers think that, well, the customers see that I'm in a hurricane zone or earthquake zone and they'll qualify me out. But in fact, what we have seen is the opposite of that in our customer relationships with their suppliers. Because if you can imagine, if you're in the high-tech industry, auto, life science, pharma, med device, aerospace verticals, which is where most of Resilink's customers operate, it's just not that easy to switch a source, so you can't go from source A to source B. In fact, most of the times there's joint design, there's technology, why a supplier has been selected. And so mapping is one of the things that we really see that brings suppliers and customers together to find alternate sites with the same supplier. And when Resilink maps the supply chain, one of the questions, Bob, as you know, we ask them is, do you have an alternate site available where you can do this activity? And so in the high-tech industry, we typically see anywhere from 20 to 30% of sites, suppliers have an alternate site available. And by collecting this information during the mapping process and knowing which parts are built redundant, have redundancy in manufacturing that the supplier already builds into sites, our customers have a leg up, meaning they're able to work with the supplier to resume production or book capacity at the alternate ahead of time. Switching sources is not always possible. Having transparency, the tools for collaboration, and together with suppliers solving problems jointly helps both companies be resilient. So I think if there is one takeaway from this session for folks who are looking at mapping that are wondering if the suppliers will or will not be comfortable, I think one of the things is that Bob mentioned is mapping is a collaborative effort. Incentives are aligned here, and both companies want to recover and meet their customer targets. So Bob, can you speak to how mapping, obviously you have been doing this for many, many years now. So can you talk about any events or history of how this has become part of your response process and how it has helped your team?
Yeah, I think so. Number one, mapping is fundamental to the ability to proactively put contingency plans in place and to be ready to react when something happens. Because we can't predict a COVID-19, Thailand flooding. These events are things that are out of our control. As I always like to say, there are some things we can control and those we can't control. For the things we can't control, we need to put mechanisms in place in being able to effectively manage those things that can happen that we can't control. And we can absolutely do that. And to do mapping is essential for that. So I think in talking to suppliers and in the supply chain, they should not be worried about this. It's not an attempt to, learn secrets or to displace them or do any of these things. It's in the end, it actually helps us all, because then we've got, separate sites, we have contingency plans, we can understand what's happening quickly, and we can get to value for our clients, maintain the revenue flows for both us and our suppliers and their suppliers. So it's actually good business, Vindia, is why we do that. And I think, as we saw early on, in COVID, we had situations in South Korea, for example, where we were rapidly able to see the cities where that outbreak occurred versus where our first and second tier suppliers were located. We knew exactly which of the sites and suppliers to talk to. And you can imagine how important this is to be able to act with speed, given the number of suppliers who are actually located in South Korea. Based on this very precise, accurate intelligence, we were able to immediately activate contingency plans, bring on those other sites, get the orders placed, and do the things that allowed us to perform as a reliable supplier and a trusted source to our clients. So in summary there, mapping is extremely important, collaboration is extremely important, and contingency planning and being able to use your tool was absolutely essential for us to be able to continue. And I think everyone's seen IBM's first quarter results. I think you would see that majorly we were able to manage what was going on there, which was an amazing given all that was happening.
Yeah, it was really exciting to hear the growth and profitability is increasing. All metrics are good, so it's wonderful to see that. What we heard is just so powerful here because, I come from the procurement world as well. I at Cisco, Flextronics, worked with many companies. Obviously, being at Flextronics, you get to work with many customers and see the complexities of their products and their supply chain. And I mean, if you're managing your supply chain, thinking, oh, I'm going to manage which are my riskiest suppliers or sites and not go down to part level, it's very difficult. As to Bob's point, it's very difficult to make decisions at that level. I mean, to give you an example, we had a supplier for memory. They had 25 sites where they did different parts of their manufacturing, and we were buying about 50 parts from that supplier. Now, that supplier had a factory fire at a China factory, and our spend with that supplier was a couple of tens of millions of dollars a year. So if we were to try to do a risk buy on everything that we bought from that supplier in reaction to that factory fire, it would be millions of dollars in raw material premiums. But because we had a mapping program in place, we knew exactly which two parts came from that China factory, and we were easily able to do a small risk buy, a few $100,000 and have no impact. So I think mapping, we sometimes think of COVID and these black swan events, but really, if I just stay on that factory fire example, Resolink alerts our customers in the high-tech industry there are more than 300 factory fires a year, not to the tier ones alone, but your second, third tier suppliers. There's smoke damage, there's evacuation for various reasons that might actually, in a clean room or wafer fab environment, result in a fairly serious disruption. So the idea here is, with what we talked about here with Bob as well, is that without a robust mapping programs, many companies end up having to spend hundreds of thousands putting a war room together, only to realize this may not be a huge event, or they may spend too much doing unnecessary risk buys. So for several weeks, those companies during COVID that did not have a mapping program, they had a lot of people in their procurement staff sitting in emergency mode, working overtime, putting together a clear picture of who's in what regions, which suppliers or parts could be affected. And this exercise went on for 10 weeks, 12 weeks in some cases. So keep in mind that they're collecting this information in the aftermath of an event when the supplier is not willing to share much because they're trying to assess their own impact. So to Bob's point, having the mapping data available to the team proactively collected before the event itself gave the team, hey, there's a few cases in Malaysia. We know exactly which suppliers we have in Malaysia. We know which parts come from the city that had this outbreak, and we can immediately find alternate sites, secure inventory, etc. So Bob, tell us about the infrastructure, this process, this muscle memory that your team has now developed from many years of not only having the mapping data, but having the monitoring in place, having a system and a process that the team follows for risk response when events happen. What was helpful? What was similar? What was different during COVID? And how did that experience help?
Well, I think, we have always realized the benefit of, mapping our supply base as we talked about. It's also extremely important to have engineering and materials team who take an interest in the supply chain and in the mapping process and in, from our SOP processes right through the delivery of parts and subsystems and products to our factories and to our clients. That's extremely important. So a system alone cannot facilitate all of that. It needs to operate. We need people, we need a process, and we need technology. And I would say where Resolink has been excellent for us is it's an excellent technology that brings all of our supplier information and monitoring into a single system which is accessible by my team using either email or, more importantly, mobile apps or web portals. It gives us proactive alerts and manages a lot of the tedium and kind of boring transactional things that are really important. They may be transactional and they may be boring, but if we don't pay attention to them, they can cause massive harm to us. So I would say having, the process, the tools, and the people all integrated and using the tools, i.e. Resolink's tool, to actually help us to be much more proactive and operate with much more speed and avoid issues has been absolutely critical, Bindia.
And this is a perfect segue to our next topic, because I think the second and third tier visibility, I think, and one of the questions from one of the attendees as well is, how do we map our supply chain to tier 2, 3, 4? How do we get companies comfortable with providing that second and third tier visibility? And, no doubt it is a challenge, but as Bob has demonstrated, IBM has been successful doing it. It is happening with a lot of dialogue. It happens with building trust with the supplier, being very transparent that this is not something you're doing, as Bob said, to hurt the supplier or to qualify them out or to seal some secrets, but to manage our customer commitments to our own customers. So I think this is a really important kind of human aspect of helping the suppliers feel comfortable about sharing this information. And I think IBM's team does a phenomenal job. Not only do they say it, but they have lived it. They have demonstrated to their suppliers that they don't use the sub-tier visibility or part site mapping to hurt the supplier in any way, but to collaborate, to operate in a spirit of partnership to help the supplier be successful while being successful in meeting their customer demands and requirements. So Bob, let's talk about the sub-tier visibility piece, right? Is many companies are right now looking at starting a mapping process because a lot of them learned with COVID that was a key missing link for their risk programs or their supply chain and procurement practices. So can you talk about this whole topic and just how to engage with the first tier suppliers to get the visibility for second or third tier? Or then what do you do with this? So fast forward a few months and you actually successfully get it. Well, what do we do with this now? How do we use it?
Well, I think I've covered a lot of these points, Bindia, but I mean, as we said, mapping is critical, and given you know, it's good that we have first tier visibility, but that doesn't really help us if the tantalum capacitor provider is, you know, down and we can't get the components we need in for the electronic card assembly and test cards that we need to put into our computers. So having effective multi-tier mapping is absolutely critical. And I think, you know, it's about honesty and transparency. We talked about that earlier. And I think as we've been working through this, you know, the interesting thing is, you know, we tend as humans to be skeptical. I think when we actually sit down and explain to our suppliers how it will benefit us and them, and I know this is a cliche, but it really is a win-win situation. And actually, we need to do this to every tier, from, you know, tier 1 to raw materials, to have an effective risk mitigation strategy and plan in place. And I would encourage everybody to do that. And the other thing I would say is it does take investment. And Bindia, you mentioned hundreds of thousands. How about billions of dollars of issues globally when we don't have supply? We're unable to bring, you know, products to our suppliers. We lose the opportunity. The investment here is relatively small, but investment is an investment in time, an investment in people, and an investment in collaboration and partnerships with our suppliers.
Bob, this is really important what you've just said. You know, during COVID, many companies put their customers on allocation, or they went lines down, or they ran out of parts in some cases, and as a result, they ended up having to charge customers more money or delayed deliveries. You know, all of this does affect how customers perceive the resilience of that supplier's supply chain. But even without COVID, you know, there are often times when companies end up doing this, maybe on a smaller scale. Maybe you're not doing it for 50 of your parts, but 1 or 2. These affect your customers' perception of you as a supplier. It affects your metrics, it affects your KPIs with that company. And it does have an impact on your long-term standing, whether you make it on the supplier preferred supplier list or what have you. 2 things just to cite here as quick examples. One is one of our customers who's a semiconductor company. In 2019, they won Supplier of the Year award for 100% on-time delivery from several customers at the supplier appreciation events. Another is a life science company who uses their risk program to differentiate themselves from their competitors. Their head of customer advocacy said to us that, you know, before my customer even asks me about this disruption or that issue, we go notify them that this event just happened worldwide, and here's what we're doing about it. So can you imagine what, fast forward a year later, the customer gets conditioned? This is not my problem, supplier. I have 5 others who are not aware, who are clueless, and may need some more attention from me. So again, this is a way to differentiate competitively and make it a source of competitive advantage. So Bob, speaking of competitive advantage, this is the time when we talk about leadership and risk, obviously, and competitive advantage. These are top level initiatives for any company. So how do people get their leadership to buy into this idea that risk management is actually something they should really care about, and make this one of the top priorities for the organization?
Yeah, I think that it is critically important that leadership of the companies understand the environment and the turbulent times that we are in, and that we as supply chain and procurement highlight to them that, you know, this is more than an insurance policy. This is actually a necessity. And I think if we were to highlight, you know, the situation of what the consequences are of not having these processes in place, it can be very compelling. But in the end, you know, we can generate, you know, business cases and ROIs, but we need to convince the CPOs the CFOs and the CEOs of the inherent value in a resilient supply chain. And I think our procurement teams are well equipped to do that. And I do think that the timing couldn't be better. It's unfortunate around the events that have brought this to the forefront, but this is the time to ensure we not only implement, but we optimize and make this comprehensive. Because as we go forward, the only thing that's certain is there's going to be more change, more turbulence, and more things that we as a procurement team need to contend with. The other thing I would say to you is that, as a supply chain community and a procurement community, one of the fundamental things that we have to do is, ensure our brand reputation is maintained intact. And as one of the key ways to do that is to be able to make supplies available and deliver on our commitments. The only way we can ensure that is to ensure that we have an effective management system, tools and process in place, as I mentioned, to make that happen reliably in spite of all of the things that can happen.
And one really interesting example of this exact thing, Bob, the brand and the confidence that robust and comprehensive mapping and risk management program can have is with one of our customers is General Motors. And in the aftermath of COVID, we saw many companies where the leadership went on in media and the procurement leaders talked about how we did not have mapping or we did not have visibility, and that was kind of a key lesson learned. There was an article in Forbes that came out with Steve Banker wrote it. It was a really nice piece on General Motors, and this is how it basically went. COVID has just happened. Oh boy, it's a hugely impactful disruption for the automotive industry. But don't write off GM because they have been mapping their supply chain for many years. They're really on top of it. Now think about the person reading this, who reads this and says, wow, look at this, hugely disruptive event, and this is how media covers you, right? So by having this program and talking about it publicly for how you are protecting shareholder interests, how you are protecting customer commitments, and using best-in-class risk management to improve your performance can be a hugely beneficial thing for your brand as well, to Bob's point. Now, one quick thing in terms of, Bob, obviously there are many different internal, stakeholders besides the leadership. There may be your corporate risk insurance program or other, some other folks like customer advocacy, as we saw, who might be sort of your other stakeholders within the company that might provide you impetus and business justification for going on and doing this program. Any thoughts on that, Bob?
Well, I think that, as we all know, taking orders from our delivery dates that we can achieve is absolutely critical to our reputation as a reliable supplier. And so when we share that, what we're doing with our customer fulfillment team, and more importantly, when we can actually deliver during a crisis, the impact is meaningful, substantial, and significant. And so I think we have to share what we are doing and actually demonstrate that our processes and our management system and our tools are delivering the results that make us a reliable supplier. And that can actually bring us a lot of goodwill from those organizations. I also think, and you mentioned this, our corporate insurance and risk teams absolutely love it when we can show them that we have this at play and can actually leverage that to actually have a better, more prudent overall management system and risk policy for our companies. So all of this planning, mapping, collaboration in the end brings value at the bottom line and substantial and significant.
So, Bob, this is very interesting. And I know that IBM is definitely one of the companies that presents supply chain risk initiatives and programs all the way across the organization, as well as all the way up to the board of directors. We certainly see this as a best practice across many of our customers. And it's really important to talk about this on a 6-monthly cadence. Now, as we move into the new normal, and this is, I think, a couple of questions as well on the list here, talking about the entire landscape of supply chain at the moment is in flux. So, Bob, how do you see the world evolving? There's a lot of conversation right now about reshoring, restrictions on China. Obviously, a lot of high-tech companies have global supply chains that are currently in flux. So talk about, how realistic, or what are some thoughts on how companies could prioritize or think about these restructuring or major investments?
Yeah, that's a very far-reaching question, but I think things are still developing in this arena. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to think about the things that we can do. And as procurement teams, we always want more than one source. We want dual or triple sources or whatever. But as we know, sometimes we have to have single sourced componentry, ASICs and things of that nature, custom ASICs, merchant ASICs, things that may only be produced in one region or by one company. So I think we as a procurement community need to be thinking that through, need to be working with our stakeholders, need to be ensuring that we are, working with the bodies like the semiconductor agencies that actually are looking to have, ways to mitigate this. Some of those ways are we have to hold more supply, for sure. We have to hold supply onshore. We have to try and have, manufacturing in more than one geo. And we have to actually think about, do we want all of our, eggs in one basket, and where we have supply predominantly coming from one country, is that prudent in today's world? And I think we all know the answer. The answer is no. Some of the actions that we can take can be quick, and some of them have multiple years to take. So there are a basket of actions that we need to take. But I think what we all need to focus on is we need to think that through, have a plan, and do the things that we can do. And then, we need partnerships. We need to partner with people, because no one company is going to be able to do everything here. And no one company is going to be able to influence, major large companies who may be only single source. So this is an area of where partnership will actually help us.
And Bob, how do you advise companies who are sort of looking to start this process? Where do you advise them to focus, or how do you get started doing something?
Well, I think I would be surprised if companies aren't already thinking about this. And I think that, the companies and the folks that are on here need to be thinking about, how do I expand what I do? How do I, and if companies don't have a supply assurance group, a resiliency group, or look at this, then they need to form a team to focus on this and go and get help. Your team, Bindia at Resilink, can certainly help with the mapping and with the suppliers, even at a tier 1 level. But I think it's like anything, if you want to be a great swimmer, you can get all the lessons in the world, but you have to dive into the swimming pool. So I think that people need to start realizing the criticality of resiliency, and then have to think through from a people, process, and technology perspective how they're going to approach this. And if they really don't have the capabilities, then there's lots of companies who can do this. IBM being one of them, for example, but lots of companies around who can help companies think about this, think through this, and as I mentioned, form partnerships and get advice and help from other companies that do this as a matter of course.
Yeah, Bob, I mean, we have a few minutes left, and I always want to ask IBM this one question. IBM's a change agent in the industry to a large extent. You and your organization has taken the leap ahead of the rest of the industry. You've helped craft the way for many companies to successfully follow. And not only that, your team does a really great job educating, talking at industry conferences, and shares very openly key learnings and advice on what to do, what not to do, because you've tried and tested something. So as we leave, one final thought. You're known for innovation, for being a global leader in adopting or championing new technology. There's so much going on the technology landscape right now with AI, blockchain, cognitive. What's your final thought for the supply chain practitioners looking at this out there, and what should they take away?
Yeah, so, a couple of comments here. Number one, as I mentioned at the start, this is one of the most exciting areas to be involved in, supply chain and procurement. So it is so compelling, so interesting. I mentioned how long I've been involved in it. Every day is different. There's more challenges. To me, the challenges present opportunities. We've developed a trust your supplier block, which absolutely is looking to leverage the latest technology where we have a digital passport for suppliers so that a supplier can put information into a blockchain once and the whole world can see it who's on that blockchain. Absolutely phenomenal technology. And as you know, Bindia, resiliency score is one of the metrics that's available through that platform. So look, the thing I'd say here is don't be, frightened by all that's going on. Don't be alarmed by it. It's an opportunity. We can do great things. You can bring great value and help your company. You need to highlight to them what we need to do, and you need to get engaged and involved.
That is super exciting, Bob. As a final close, I will say that I sincerely believe, and I think all of the folks on this call agree. I hope that it has never been a better time to be in supply chain. We're going to be designing the supply chain of the future, right? And so I think, Bob, thank you for your time, giving us some thoughts on what an exciting world of supply chain we live in. There's never a dull moment. Today there's a fire, tomorrow there's a hurricane, the next day there's some other crisis. But the thing is that it's dynamic, you're problem solving, you're solutioning, and if that gets you excited, supply chain is an awesome place to be in. And thank you all for your time and for your comments, your feedback. We will try to get to any questions that we did not answer live during the Q&A offline and wherever possible. So thank you all again for attending. This session will be available for the next 12 months on our website. So if you did have colleagues or friends who may have missed it that you think would be would find this of value, please do feel free to share. Thank you again for attending. Best of luck to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.